Good evening and thank you for joining us live from our studio in Johannesburg, and I'm Yvonne Katsande. Today on Worldview, we talk about a trial that has taken the world's attention, the Oscar Pistorius trial. Oscar Pistorius was arrested after the fatal shooting of his girlfriend, Reeva Steenkamp, at his Pretoria home on the 14th of February of 2013. Pistorius had claimed he thought there was a burglar in his toilet when he fired 4 shots through the locked door in the early hours of the 14th of February last year, killing Steenkamp instantly. The Paralympic star was released on R1 million bail, and his 43-day trial started on the 3rd of March of 2014. On the 12th of September, Judge Thokozile Masipa found him not guilty of murder, but guilty of culpable homicide. He was acquitted on 2 charges of contravening the Firearms Control Act, but found guilty of firing a pistol in a restaurant. Masipa found Pistorius guilty of discharging a firearm in public when he shot from his friend Darren Fresco's Glock pistol under a table at Tasha's restaurant in Melrose Arc in Johannesburg in January of 2013. Now, Pistorius was found not guilty on 2 firearms-related charges: illegal possession of ammunition and shooting through an open sunroof of a car with his 9mm pistol while driving with friends in Modderfontein on the 30th of September of 2012. Sentencing started on the 13th of October, and it will take a couple more days until the sentencing is finalized. There has been mixed views on how the presiding judge handled the matter. Some still believe that Oscar is guilty of murder. In a bid to find answers and get the public view, Worldview embarked on a journey to speak to experts and get views from the general public. Let's have a look. The State versus Oscar Pistorius. Pistorius, a leading South African runner who won attention as an athlete with a disability competing at a high level, including at multiple Paralympic Games and the 2012 Summer Olympics. Steenkamp, a model, was his girlfriend. In the early morning of Thursday, 14 February 2013, Steenkamp was shot and killed by Pistorius at his Pretoria home. Pistorius acknowledged that he shot Steenkamp, but said that he mistook her for an intruder.
Did she scream?
No, my lady.
Are you sure?
Yes, my
Would
lady.
you have heard her?
I don't think I would have heard it.
Exactly.
There was a gunshot that went off, my lady. My ears were ringing.
That's why I'm asking you the question. How can you exclude the fact that she was screaming if you couldn't hear? May I?
We shall resume on Monday.
Pistorius was taken into police custody and was formally charged with murder in a Pretoria court on 15 February 2013. On 25 February 2014, Judge President Dunstan Mlambo ruled in the High Court in Pretoria that the entire trial could be broadcast live via audio and that parts of the trial could be broadcast live via television, namely the opening and closing arguments, the testimony of consenting state witnesses, the judgment and the sentencing if applicable. Then the journey began in what was dubbed the trial of the century. The High Court of South Africa in Pretoria opened on 3 March of 2014. On the 11th to the 12th of September 2014, Judge Thokozile Masipa delivered a verdict that Pistorius was not guilty of murder, but guilty of the culpable homicide of Steenkamp and reckless endangerment with a firearm at a restaurant. The trial was adjourned until 13th October for sentencing. And now the world awaits the verdict. Talking about the Oscar Pistorius trial, is the story of Oscar and Riva Steenkamp unique?
I don't believe it's a unique case. If we're looking at it from a perspective of domestic violence or intimate partner violence, there's quite a lot of that internationally and specifically to South Africa, to the extent that we have a Domestic Violence Act, which in itself should tell you the extent of the problem. Of course, the nature of Riva's demise in this case, she died at the hands of a gun. And according to the judgment, according to the judge, to the presiding officer, it was a negligent killing, i.e. culpable homicide. Yes, only Oscar and Riva will know the facts, right, of what happened on that particular night. But as far as the judgment goes, it was negligent killing, and we do have quite a lot of that here in South Africa.
What does that then say about the gun violence in South Africa?
So we don't get the full picture, but certainly there are various ways of verifying some of these things. Like, for example, if you go to medical centers, trauma centers that deal a lot, they have said since 2012 there's been a bit of an upsurge in gun-related injuries, and patients being brought in for emergency treatment due to gun wounds and so on and so forth. But again, there's no specific data to tell us that a lot of this is armed robbery, a lot of this is within the domestic violence setting, a lot of this is police and so on and so forth. But certainly, yes, in terms of gun ownership, numbers are quite high in South Africa. And in terms of the incidence of gun-related violence, especially deaths, murders at the hand of a gun, those numbers are going up as well in the general context of violence in South Africa.
The question now is, who gets shot and killed in South Africa? Yes, people are trying to protect themselves from different attacks and violence that have been happening, that are on the surge, like you did say, but who gets shot and killed in South Africa?
There are various categories, and generally you have cases of, for example, those within the South African Police Service. Okay, obviously due to the nature of their job, and those who work specifically in units that deal with certain scenarios where weapons have to be used, where lethal force has to be used in arresting dangerous suspects. It's not your everyday officer who uses his gun, even though they are armed. So there'll be one such category due to the dangerous nature of their job. You have within the context of domestic violence itself, not only police, but individuals who use their weapons to commit suicide, to kill their families, having failed to acquire other conflict resolution mechanisms within the domestic front, and therefore turn to killing families and thereafter attempt suicide. Also within the social setting, people who know each other, usually knives are used, let's say at the scenario of taverns, beer halls, so on and so forth. But guns can be used in some of those particular situations, revenge killings and so on and so forth. Must be borne in mind that as much as we have a central firearms registry, okay, this does not account for all the weapons in South Africa. Okay, so you would think that with this figure of 2.9 million of registered arms, that majority of these deaths would probably come from, for argument's sake, within the residential areas, people protecting their homes from alleged burglars or those who want to rob them, and so on and so forth. People do defend themselves, but we must also bear in mind that a lot of these firearms, we don't have a figure, of course, because some of these firearms are very much illegal. So we don't know how many illegal firearms are out there. So it's not every registered firearm that is used in violence. It can be unregistered firearms, and there are various ways of acquiring unregistered firearms.
But would you agree with me if I say that, particularly in South Africa, there has been misuse and misconduct of firearms? Hence, will the government be able to actually control the use of gun violence?
There are various mechanisms in place before SAPS can give you that particular license. So generally, I would say people with firearms have gone through some of the most stringent tests, right, and vetting and so on and so forth to acquire their arms. Of course, you can't control them all. And I'm not sure if there's a limit as to the number of firearms that an individual can own. As we saw in the media over the past few weeks, months, Oscar's collection of firearms, and he apparently did continue to apply for further firearms. But it must be borne in mind that for each firearm that you own, you need a separate
But isn't there a
license.
limit as to how many firearms?
That's the point I'm
one
making.
human being
Yes,
has?
that's the point I'm making. I don't think with just looking at the Firearms Control Act, I think one is entitled to have as many firearms as you so desire. But of course, during the application process, you need to motivate why it is that you want this particular firearm, whether it's a rifle, whether it's a pistol, whether it's a shotgun, and so on and so forth. There has to be some motivation which these South African Police Services will consider. And you can only acquire a firearm license from the South African Police Services and no other service provider, because they also take in all your details, where you live, fingerprints, and other biological, biographical details, etc. there. So that is quite stringent. However, beyond that, it's almost like a driver's license. You can't control how people drive once you award them that particular license. But certainly because of the regulations within the Firearms Control Act, I think most people are responsible, realizing that this is indeed a lethal weapon. It's not a toy. It's not a sporting piece of equipment like a golf club, and so on and so forth. While guns are used for sport, but in specific areas, and hence one of those firearm charges that it was alleged that he had violated one of the regulations within the Firearms Control Act, but which he was acquitted for there. So yes, I think gun control, there's been a lot of talk of gun control in South Africa, but you can only control the weapons that are registered. You cannot control those that are not registered. Of course, the Oscar Pistorius case is a case of weapons that are registered. All of his firearms are registered and led to this particular case here. You can't even control those people with registered firearms, depending on the scenario. Certainly, if people are of the opinion that their lives are in danger, okay, which is what, according to the judgment, Oscar Pistorius felt at that particular time. He felt obliged, well, not obliged, but he felt it was okay at the time to release 4 bullets at the time to protect himself, which unfortunately later he realized was a mistake.
That's it. That the state should have, the state prosecution should have presented the case of culpable homicide as opposed to murder, given the circumstances that they didn't actually have enough evidence to convince the judge in court.
Well, when we look at murder, by definition, murder is the unlawful and intentional taking of a life. Okay, that's the definition of
Which looks like that's what happened in this case.
Yes, which initially most people thought happened here, right? So that is murder, that he intentionally killed Riva. Okay, specifically, it was his intention to end Riva's life. That is murder, that was the charge. Now, there's dolus directus, where one would say, I shoot you with the hoping that you die. Okay, it is my objective that you die. That is dolus directus, right? Which the state could not prove here because that requires to prove intent or premeditation. Mm-hmm. Okay, that's essentially dolus directus. Now, the state did not have sufficient evidence to prove premeditation or intent, direct intent in this particular case. But there's also the other intent that we can look at, that, which is dolus eventualis. Right. What dolus eventualis simply says is that you foresee the death of someone through your actions. Okay, but you resign yourself to continue that particular conduct or that particular action, which is where they could have won the case. Possibly, I say they could have won the case on that particular charge. So, but it is custom, and not only in South Africa, but in many jurisdictions, that you always go for the biggest charge, which was murder dolus directus, failing which, it's an alternative charge, murder dolus eventualis, and should that fail, you can always lean on culpable homicide. Okay, so which is why the state did that in that particular order in relation to Riva's death.
There are chances that Oscar Pistorius would actually not go behind bars. He would either be under home arrest and serve the community by cleaning the streets, which South Africa has really cried foul. How is that possible, and what are the circumstances leading to such?
My analysis of the case, I go along with many legal experts on this, that there was an error in the application of the law. If we look at the wording of Judge Masipa's judgment in terms of whether or not it was dolus eventualis, I think there was an error in law based on her wording, i.e. when she says that it was not foreseeable by Oscar that Riva was behind the door. Okay. With dolus eventualis, it's not about a specific individual. With dolus eventualis, it's about anybody. Was there an individual behind the door? Did Oscar foresee the death of that individual? Now, the subjective facts are simple. I wasn't focusing so much on the weapon that he used, the 9mm gun. We know that's a lethal weapon anyway, but also the caliber of the bullets that were used. Okay, the bullets in themselves, right, upon impact of its first subject or object, they expand. The idea being that whatever they touch, they essentially destroy. I think destroy is a very kind word. Okay. Yeah, they literally obliterate. Hence, if you saw the pictures that were leaked and so on and so forth, her arm that was shot, her arm was literally blown off. Right. That's the nature of the weapon that was used. So to say that he did not foresee, so this is what dolus eventualis says, that the moment he picked up his gun, okay, firstly, it's a lethal weapon. Okay, that's what guns do. They injure seriously or kill. There's no other alternative. They're very different from a gun with rubber bullets, etc. So he picked up a lethal weapon, and with the nature of the bullets in the gun that he knew, right, do nothing else but kill. These are not bullets that injure. These are bullets that destroy or tear organs, which inevitably will lead to death, without a doubt. Okay. So having used that gun, I cannot possibly foresee how he did not foresee the death of the person behind the door, whoever it was.
Firstly, when you look at the point of that guy, is a disabled person, and we think let us have a piece of forgiveness to him. I request just to have a piece of forgiveness that what they did, I think is a mistake. Because even in now, this thing, they busy disturbing him at the mind. So I think for me, it's all right to have a house arrest.
What do you think the verdict will be?
It is shocking that the social workers working for the correctional services in South Africa, Joel Maringa or something of that sort, the name, could come to the same court instead of being partial and being watching the independent, whatever, the social worker that was discussing the report of the judgment, that correctional services has failed us. I don't trust correctional services of South Africa now.
The judgment given in Oscar's case is totally wrong. I feel that he should be guilty of murder instead of culpable homicide. And he's a lucky guy. Like, he's got correctional service, 3 years of correctional service. That's not fair.
What does this say about the South African justice system?
It says that, like any other system, it can make mistakes, but some mistakes are inexcusable. And they make the public question whether, the justice system does actually deliver justice.
In a courtroom, it's like a game. It's a situation whereby who can convince the judge that he has a stronger case than the other. So my opinion in the Oscar case is that the guy's lawyer, Barry Rue, he put in a lot of work, and Gerinel did his best, but they could only find him for culpable homicide. Well, obviously they couldn't find him guilty for murder, and legally it is a fair trial. It was a fair trial.
Actually, I think he should go to jail because everyone knows that Oscar Pistorius killed River Steenkamp, and the family of River Steenkamp are still suffering from the tragedy of what happened.
The whole world has been watching this Oscar Pistorius trial.
Yes.
What impact does this have on our legal system? the way the judge has handled it, the way the state prosecution and the defense team have handled the whole trial until now that we're waiting for the sentencing. What kind of impact does this have on the South African legal justice system?
Let me sort of connect this with 2010, the World Cup. Prior to the World Cup, there were many impressions of what South Africa is. Backward African country trying to develop, animals running around on airports and et cetera, et cetera. 2010 came and went, people were impressed. Okay, they saw the civilized nature of South Africa, the developed nature of South Africa, and how it is somewhat caught up with the rest of the world. Now come into the Oscars, so that's the economics and sports. Now come the criminal justice system now. They've seen that, yes, there is a functioning criminal justice system using Roman Dutch law and so on and so forth. So these are some of the positives, and especially in the context of the Dewani case, you're right, there were those fears. Some of you, I don't know if you read some of the presentations made by Dewani's legal representatives not wanting him to come back to South Africa because they feared that we don't have a functioning criminal justice system from police, the courts, and the correctional services. And what this case has done is it's put a light on us, it's put the spotlight on us that indeed we do have a functioning criminal justice system. Granted, yes, there have been criticisms of Masiba's judgment, which is perfectly normal, right? Judgments are always criticized by legal experts, and hence we have a Supreme Court of Appeal to remedy that particular problem. We'll hear if Harry now does go on to an appeal through the Supreme Court of Appeal. At least we have those functioning systems. If needs be, as far as the Constitutional Court, we have those functioning systems. So those are the positives. The negatives, it's more local, but I guess also internationally we've exposed ourselves to what we talk about in other fields of social life in South Africa, the disparities between the rich and the poor here in South Africa. Oscar was charged in March last year. The alleged crime having happened in February 2013. We're now sitting 2014, October, and almost coming to the conclusion of the case, a year and a half. Okay, that is not symptomatic of every single criminal justice case, every single court case, every single criminal case that you get here in South Africa. So what am I pointing at here? That there's a perception of preferential treatment within the criminal justice system, as in the education system, as in the health system. This is just simply a symptom of one of South Africa's ills, right? You've got people languishing in prison, awaiting trial for 2 years, 3 years, 4 years. Oscar's case is done in a year and a half. Okay, the perception being that because, firstly, the state made him a priority because of his status. Okay, and secondly, the state with its resources and Oscar with his own resources as well is able to fight back, especially this particular system, and he has every right to do so. He has every right to defend his freedom, to avoid going into prison. However, it's not your ordinary man on the street here in South Africa who would receive that kind of legal service, would receive that kind of treatment. And dare I say even that particular attention from the state. Okay, so it highlights a lot of disparities, not only within the legal system, but something which is symptomatic of South African society by and large. And unfortunately, that is the nature of the beast in terms of justice. If you've got money, you can afford to hire your guys like Barry Roo. Again, also exposes elements of our legal system. Who is Barry Roo? Okay, who is Harry Nel? Right, these are your top brains, top legal minds here in South Africa for prosecution and for defense, making their living. But some questions have been asked. Where are the black lawyers? Okay, the black advocates. So this case is more than just Oscar and Riva. It also opens up other various cans of worms, which of course the media have not focused on, but in due course they will. All right, once the dust has settled and the realities of this case now will apply to psychologists, criminologists, sociologists, and these issues are further discussed. Hence you have people like Mark Shuttleworth donating to a quarter of a billion rand to people who want to further their claims on justice through the Constitutional Court. Constitutional courts are very expensive. You don't just approach them, say my right to this has been violated. It's a lengthy and costly practice, which is the symptomatic of society at large in terms of the justice system. So I think those are a few of the negatives that we get from this particular case. But at the end of the day, justice is served.
Yeah. Yeah. Justice is served.
Yeah.
Well, thank you very much for your time. We truly appreciate it.
Okay, thank you, Yvonne.
Thank you.
Right.
Well, that was our expert analyst, that is Professor Emmanuel Mavaranyika of Monash Criminal Justice Office there. Now, a cousin of the slain model, Riva Steenkamp, made a tearful plea on Thursday for Oscar Pistorius to pay for what he has done, as the prosecution sought to make sure he goes to jail. Battling tears and with her voice trembling, Kip Martin told a sentencing hearing that she was very fearful of the Paralympian and did not believe his apology for killing her cherished cousin was genuine. Now, while some have asked the question, is Oscar's tears for the life he took, or are they primarily for the life that he has lost, which is a life of sponsors and money and lavish and style, and whether really there was an error in the law, or did Judge Masipa play by the book? It still remains that only Oscar and the late Riva Steenkamp are the only two people who know exactly what really happened on the 14th of February of 2014. We'll meet again next week, same time, and until then, good evening and thank you for watching Worldview.